Welcome to the Digitally Dreaming Off the Gridiron podcast. It is your host, Oscar Lee. I'm joined today by three-time Super Bowl champion, three-time All-Pro, actually four-time All-Pro, three-time first-team All-Pro, three-time Pro Bowler, College Football Hall of Fame inductee, member of the 10-year anniversary club, and hopefully eventual 49ers Hall of Famer, Randy Cross. Randy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, so maybe someday.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure why it's taking them so long, but
Hey, that's called worrying about stuff you have no control
right.
over.
All right. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty organic conversation. We'll start from your early life and progress through. Before we get started, I want to ask you. So obviously, our Niners are 2-2, first place in the NFC West. What is your take currently about the current state of the team? Obviously, all the stuff about obviously your former teammates Steve Young and Brent Jones talking about Jimmy, how they think Jimmy should conduct himself. What's your kind of current take on the current state of the Niners?
um, well, I mean, they were going to be transformed with Trey at quarterback, which no one really knew what that meant.
Right.
They were hoping it didn't mean a step back as the learning process progressed and whatnot. That all obviously got very interrupted. And suddenly you're in a position where you're going back to the guy that you semi miraculously put on a contract right before the season started. He had to play. He had to play in that. Had to play in that. The second game didn't really look very good. Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff that wasn't a real great look, which was very non Jimmy G. But it's anybody that was surprised by what they saw Monday night, I think hasn't paid much attention to the Niners over the last couple of years, because that's with him at quarterback, that's them. I mean, he's going to be somewhere in the 18 for 25, 26 for 250 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, exactly.
And the critiques will come in if you suddenly have a couple of those evangelist passes, where he makes 70,000 stand up and say Jesus because you can't figure out why he threw it. Which does happen. That comes with the territory. You're going to get a few of those a year. He just does stuff like that. But he also wins, and you hear it all the time. And it's not a crutch. That's kind of the reality of the situation. So, as a legitimate, I've been out of calling NFL games now for about 10 or 12 years. I did it for 20 years. And the best thing about that is I can be a Niner fan. I can watch the games. I can follow the team. There's nothing fun about following the team when it comes to social media and everything in general, because right. I think people have lost their freaking minds.
Yeah.
But yeah, there have been some things that Jimmy G's done over the last couple of weeks that, if he had the old mulligan, which nobody does, but if he'd do them differently. But what you saw Monday night, that's that team. It's an offense with some skill players that nobody in their right mind wants to see. And not one single team in this league wants to face that defense if they have anything to say about it. If the Niners aren't on their schedule, there's nobody out there saying, could we redo this? And could I please face that defense? That doesn't exist. That ain't ever going to happen.
100%. No, obviously the number one defense in the NFL right now, points per game, in yards allowed, in sacks, right? Nick Bosa coming off the edge. Last time I got to see them was actually the NFC Championship game back there. It was a phenomenal game, like you said, running and defensively. And I mean, this team looks even better defensively than that 2019 team. So a lot to be excited for if you're a Niners fan.
Yeah, there is.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get started with your career, obviously. So your early life, right? You grew up in Southern California. So let me ask you, was football your first love, or how did you get into football?
Kind of by accident. I mean, my family moved to LA about the same time the Dodgers did. I was born in New York. I was born in Mount Sinai Hospital, lived in Brooklyn. And we came because basically the TV business moved to LA.
Right.
At that point, radio and TV was based in New York. My dad was an actor. So we moved to LA. And I just started, I followed my dad's business. That was my thing. My obsession with sports was one team and one sport. It was baseball, and it was the Dodgers.
Yeah.
I was just a rabid Dodger fan, and I played baseball as much as I could year round. The only time I really played football were on Saturdays in the fall. There were tackle football games in this big open lot next to a liquor store by where I lived. And it was everybody from like 12 to 25 or so in the neighborhood would show up and just beat the crap out of each other. And I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't play any Pop Warner. I was a little bigger, I was kind of a heavy kid. So I didn't want to start playing Pop. I think my dad took me when I was 10, and they wanted me to play with the 12-year-olds, which, if you think back or anything about that, there's a big difference in 2 years when you're that young. So I didn't have any desire for that. And again, my dad basically interceded and said, look, you're going to take this entrance exam to go to this high school called Crespi Carmelite. Did not want to do it. Told him I didn't want to be a priest. Told him I didn't want to. I said I had no interest in going to school with all guys. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me for a lot of reasons. But that's where I started. He looked at me and said, look, go out for football. He said, if you go out for football, you'll meet at least half your class. And he was right, because there were 40, 45, 50 guys on the football team, and I had 92 guys in my freshman class. So yeah, I met half my freshman class, and that's how I started in football. And I started as a quarterback. I was 5'8", about 175 pounds. So I was horizontally challenged, let's say. But by the end of my freshman year, I was 6'1".
Wow.
So I spent my freshman year with either a heating pad or ice bags on my knees and my back, the way I was growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Those media growth spurts are pretty, they hit you fast, right? So, and so obviously, through your high school career, you also played track. You are competing track, the shot put. You set the record in the nationals. And you got to play against, go up against Jim Neidhart and some other, wrestling legends. I'm not sure, kind of, if you, did you and Jim did you guys have much of a relationship, and kind of how was it, kind of also being like a multi-sport athlete for me, baseball, football, and track,
Yeah, well, I started throwing the shot my freshman year. Our athletic director wanted me to do it, and I had a coach by the name of Harry Welch, who, along with me and about 110 others, were inducted into the California High School Hall of Fame, the inaugural class. And Harry was an amazing football coach, and was a crazy good shot put coach, because he knew the techniques, and he was about repetitions and technique and quickness and explosion and all that. And I didn't lift weights. I didn't lift weights till I was a second year in the NFL, but it was all about how you could move. And well, Jim Neidhart he went to senior year to a school called Newport Harbor. And that's where he was when he won the state. He was a year after me. And the year that he was third in the CIF behind Terry Albritton and myself. And Terry Albritton is who I beat in the state, who went to Newport Harbor. So when he left Newport Harbor, Neidhart transferred there. Wow. And Terry, 2 years, maybe 3 years after, we were dueling in high school, he set the world record. Wow. At 72 something. He was a prodigy. He was amazing. And he was a guy that he was not unfamiliar with a weight room. So I threw a little bit when I got to UCLA, because my plan was to get out of spring football. I was going to throw the shot put. Yeah. Coaches figured me out pretty quick. And again, they wanted me to lift a lot. And I wasn't a big fan of, straining over inanimate objects.
Right. And for me, obviously, I played JUCO ball too, and I went to start spring ball. I didn't play in high school, and so obviously when I came, I was 135 pounds, dripping wet, and so I needed the weight training. But obviously, for you, going through 4 years high school and being a multi-sport athlete, maybe you didn't need it because you had natural athletic talent, right? So, that's a lot, to be said.
Yeah, but it was really, and I tell kids all the time, and it gets lost. It's your ability to be explosive, and you combine that with a quickness or speed, which they're not the same thing, but you get quickness and speed and explosiveness, and you learn your techniques the right way. I don't care what you're doing. You can do it at a really high level, but it takes a lot of repetition and a lot of practice time. I mean, a lot of practice time. So yeah, it was a fun time in my life. I just had my 50th high school reunion last weekend. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's talk about, obviously you mentioned UCLA. So you got into UCLA, right? And so talk to me about kind of when you stepped on campus, kind of what was your you mentioned kind of, trying to get out of spring practice, spring ball, right? And, talk to me about that. Kind of what was your experience like, stepping on UCLA for the first time?
Well, I was like most linemen. If you talk to guys that were offensive linemen in college and the pros, very, very few of us started as offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. We were recruited because, you put your best athletes, the big guys, you put them on defense. Right. And I played defense in high school. I dabbled in offense, but my best friend in high school, a guy named Keith Eck, he played the position I played, but he played on offense so I could play defense, which was great because he also ended up going to UCLA. But Terry Donahue asked me if I wanted to, go over to the offensive side of the ball. And I was like, well, yeah, if there's a path to actually play. He said, yeah. And he wanted to teach me how to snap, how to be a center. So he says, the more things you can do, the more valuable you are. And he also at that time taught me how to long snap, which is something I did from my sophomore year. I did field goals, extra points, and punts from my sophomore year in college until my last year in the pros.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So that was fun back then. I mean, learning all that stuff, and I had no clue. I was, hey, yeah, sure, dude. What a good deal. I'll give it a shot. But I was really lucky. Throughout my career, all my high school coaches played with Donahue on the 66 Rose Bowl team.
Right.
So that was the kind of the connection to UCLA. Plus, I was raised a UCLA fan, but it was a common theme. We had the Crowther sled and all the same techniques and the same ways of playing. So none of that changed from high school to college. And then by the time I got into the pros, my last 10 years, I was with an offensive line coach named Bob McKittrick, who's, I think, one of the best assistants in NFL history. Not a very well-loved man, I will add, because he did some stuff and had some blocking techniques, which caused a lot of rule changes. But, he had a UCLA history. He had coached with Tommy Prothro at UCLA. So, yeah, I was lucky. I had some fantastic coaches starting at UCLA and in high school.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, you talked about kind of, the transition, to kind of offensive line and, obviously long snapping. And UCLA, you guys, you made it to the 76 Rose Bowl. You played up, you lined up against two-time Heisman Trophy winner Archie Griffin. So what was that like, obviously, leading that team, to the Rose Bowl and then obviously beating arguably the greatest football player in college football history?
Yeah, we had a couple of college football Hall of Famers on our team. So it wasn't like we were an empty chair.
Right.
We had John Shira, we had Wendell Tyler, we had Cliff Frazier, Jerry Robinson. Actually, Jerry Robinson, who, was an All-Pro for gazillion years at Philadelphia and a 3-time All-American at UCLA. He was a freshman when I was a senior. He was a wide receiver my senior year. And Terry Donahue made him a linebacker in spring of his freshman year. And he was a three-time consensus All-American at linebacker. So we had some pretty decent players ourselves. But yeah, they were number one and they had beaten the crap out of us in the regular season. So, they were favored by about 3 touchdowns in that game.
Yeah. So obviously going in there and winning, getting the win must have been huge, right? Just because,
Oh yeah. Well, we went out, we went to all the stuff, and when you go to the Rose Bowl, you get to do some cool things. Like you go to Lowry's Steakhouse and they have that big prime rib where everybody eats as much as they can. And which team had the most pounds of beef consumed, and you get to go to Disneyland, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's, and we were really looking forward to it. We had a bit of a revolt by the team on Dick Vermeil, because the first week of the prep, you get 17 practice days, I think it was, before you play the game. And he wanted to do double days the first week of the two-a-days, the first week of the prep. And as a team, we went, no, we ain't doing that. No. Yeah. We lost, but everybody kind of like, no one went out to practice the first day and said, screw this, we got to talk about this. We have a vote here. We're the ones who won the game. But we thought, but no, it was it was a fine memory getting to do that. I actually got hurt in practice. The day after that whole thing started, when we started double days, I broke my ankle. What we refer to now as a bad high ankle sprain. But I did that, and then I played in the game, and then I played in the Hula Bowl and the Japan Bowl. Japan Bowl was the first time they played that, where they had U.S. college teams go over to Tokyo to play in an all-star game. And I just basically had my ankle taped in a little mini cast and up in the air for about 3 weeks after I heard it in prep for the game, just to get to the point where you could maybe bear the fact that it hurt like hell, but you were trying to get up playing these games.
Yeah. Man, it's incredible. Yeah, obviously in the Japan Bowl, still in the Hula Bowl, I've had other guests on the show like Marcus Ogden and other NFL players who said the Hula Bowl increased their draft stock. For you, obviously, you getting that exposure, post, the Rose Bowl, retiring, your final collegiate game, winning the Rose Bowl, kind of, when you prepare for the draft, what was that experience like? Initially?
Yeah, it was very different than now.
Yeah.
It really started, I'd never even thought about playing in the NFL till it was spring of my junior year. They have what they call senior day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the rising seniors, the seniors that have just finished. And it's kind of like we call pro days now, but back then there weren't pro days, but you did the same stuff. You did the lifting, you did the, jump your furthest, jump your highest, run your fastest, all that, goofy stuff in underwear. It's got nothing to do with football. Yeah, we did that. And there was a legendary scout and general manager and executive from the Dallas Cowboys by the name, God, why am I drawing a blank? But anyway, he told me,
Gil Brandt.
Yeah. Gil Brandt told me, he goes, do you know you're going to be probably a first or second round draft pick? And I looked at him and went, oh, really? No, nobody's really told me that yet. He goes, you might want to, think about that. I was versatile too. Because I played center my sophomore year. My junior year, I played guard. And my senior year, we had 9 really good linemen. 7 of us actually got drafted and played in the NFL. But we had 9 guys, so we had 2 offensive lines. So when the first offensive line would play 2 or 3 series, I was the right guard. And then the next offensive line had come in, I was the center. So that versatility, did me well when it came to the league, because they kind of valued the fact that you could play a couple different positions.
100%. Yeah, the versatile offensive line, as you can see with the Niners too now, right? You kind of need that versatility, right? I mean, it's just musical chairs at this point.
But you better be versatile,
right?
and the consistency too. I mean, that was one of the things when Bill Walsh got there in '79. He had 4 of the 5 offensive linemen were already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Keith Fonhorst, myself, Fred Quillen, and John Ayers. We were already there, and he got Dan Audick from San Diego, and he was our left tackle for that Super Bowl. Then he got Bubba. So Bubba was there, through the rest of better part of the next 5 or 6 years. Then added Steve Wallace and Harris Barton. But the core group of us were together for about 7 or 8 years, which, there was no free agency back then. So there wasn't much to get into the way of playing together for a long period of time and at the same place.
Absolutely, yeah. No salary cap, no free agency made it, a lot of things possible, which can't otherwise happen today. But actually, yeah, you segued to my next question because yeah, you talked about when Bill Walsh got there. I want to talk about right before Bill Walsh got there, when you were there for those 3 years, from '76 to '78, right? Kind
Yeah,
of what
yeah,
was that? What was that like? Because you had Monty Clark, you had a bunch of other coaches, and so what was the kind of that
yeah.
culture like? You know,
Well, Aunt Monty was my first coach. Um, and he was a legendary offensive line coach. He had coached the great, offensive line at the Dolphins, the undefeated team and those Super Bowl teams. So he had coached Larry Little and Jim Langer, and there was a bunch of those guys, and he was really, it's kind of an imposing dude. I mean, he's 6'6" or so, and probably about 310, 320 pounds, a big guy.
yeah,
So when he drafted me, um, he made no uncertain terms the first time I talked to him. He goes, I'm drafting an offensive lineman with my first pick. I'm obviously kind of putting my neck out here. You better back it up.
yeah,
Well, I come up and we're going to do our rookie day. So we're going to run, we're going to lift, we're going to test, we're going to do all that stuff. I did 2.25. I did it twice. That's 2 reps at 2.25. I did 1 pull up, and I'm walking out of the weight room, and he looked at me like, "Are you trying to get me fired?" And I laughed. I went, "No, I'm not." I said, I don't lift weights. What can I tell you?" He goes, "Well, you better run your ass off." And I ran a great 40 time, like a 4.8 or 4.75 or something. But that was kind of, how that whole thing started. He was something. We were 8-6, almost made the playoffs.
right,
We lost a game in St. Louis that kind of kept us out of it. And St. Louis went to the playoffs, and we didn't. Then Eddie DeBartolo bought the team and brought in Joe Thomas as the general manager. And, Eddie was, for Niner fans, is the best thing that ever happened to that franchise.
100%.
And, Joe Thomas was the worst. It was terrible. For some reason, he liked me, but he treated me great. But I might have been the exception,
Right.
because it was horrendous. We got bad really fast. We were 5-9. No, yeah, 5-9. Then we were 2-14 the first year that the 16 game schedule existed. That was without a doubt the worst 2-14 team ever. It was an epically bad team. Then they hired Bill Walsh, and we were 2-14 again. But that was probably the best 2-14 team ever. The way we could move the ball and score and do all that. But yeah, Bill was my 5th head coach in 4 years, because we had gone through 2 in '78, and we'd fired the other 2, Ken Myers and Monty Clark. So yeah, there were a lot of us that were like that. I mentioned Keith and Farney and Ayers and Quillen, and a lot of us that had been there for a while. So when Bill first got up there to make speeches, he said, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you'll just outlast me." He says, "I've got too big a contract. They can't fire me for a while. So you aren't going to outlast me. That ain't going to happen. So you better earn your way." And everybody's going, "Ooh." He goes, "Plus, I got a question for you." He goes, "If you can't play for this team, you can't play for me, who the hell else are you going to play for in the NFL? This team is terrible." And everybody in that meeting was like, "Huh, guess he's got a point."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, and
Yeah,
it's a great way because I think that I appreciate that story because that kind of it shows you how he set the tone when he first stepped foot into the 49ers organization. And obviously, like you said, when Bill Walsh was there the first season, the 2-14 team, they lost I think 9 games or 10 games by just by less than 3 or 6 points, something like ridiculous. And
yeah.
so, fast forward now to 1980, right? And now, obviously, Joe was drafted, the year that Bill came in, right? Kind of what was that experience like, for that 1980 team? When Steve was kind of starting off the first half of the year, Joe comes in
Yeah.
mid-year, so talk to me about that.
Well, the offense was better. Again, it was pretty good in '79. It was really good in 1980. Defense, we couldn't play dead. We couldn't stop anybody. I mean, the games were about, they were similar. We won a few more of those close ones. In fact, we set the all-time comeback record against New Orleans that
Yeah.
year. We were down by 28 points at halftime, 35-7, and came back and beat them. And that served us for a long time, because once you can do something like that, you can always kind of draw back on it. But we were defensively really poor. And I remember Bill 1 week towards the end, maybe 3/4 or plus of way through the season, we lost like 8 in a row. And there were 8 pretty close games. And he just, in a moment of honesty, we were talking, he goes, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I remember it was Keith Vonhorst and I standing there looking at him like, oh shit.
Yeah.
You're pretty good. We don't need you leaving.
Yeah.
We've got a point of reference. We know what bad coaching is like. We got to keep this guy around.
Right.
Yeah. But that 80 team was on offense very, very good. Some parts in defense were okay. But it wasn't until that draft the next year in 81 when we picked up a defensive backfield plus a free agent in Dwight Hicks that made a huge difference. Plus all those trades, for Fred Dean and picking up Charles Young and picking up Hacksaw Reynolds and, go down that list of all the guys that, we put that team together. When Bill did that and put a defense on the other side of the field, that made a just monstrous difference to the kind of team we were.
100%. Change the complete identity, getting all the free agents, drafting Ronnie Lott and getting defensive backfield. And that really kind of solidified the identity of what would become, now, the 1981, Super Bowl champion team, the first Super Bowl franchise history. So kind of talk to me about, heading into that season, was there any kind of feeling of expectation? And kind of as the season progressed, kind of when did the team feel like, yeah, this is it?
Yeah, definitely not early. I mean, we were 1-2 to start the season. Went to Washington and beat them at RFK. And that was the birth of the wide body experience for the road trips too. Because we were going to fly to Washington and we had a normal plane we were taking. And that plane had a mechanical. And Keith Simon, who was our travel guy and, eventually a vice president of the whole organization, he looks at the United representative and says, look, I'm going to be seeing an airplane right there at that gate in the next half hour, or we'll never use you people again. So they pulled up a DC-10. They had one, that's United's hub. So
yeah.
There's a DC-10 back in the hangar. They go get that. They bring it out. We fly in a DC-10. So every guy's got like 3 or 4 seats. We're all laying out, but it was just, we were having a good, big old time.
Yeah.
So we get in the locker room after we beat Washington and everybody's chanting DC-10 at Eddie. and Eddie was great. Eddie goes, as long as you win, we'll be flying the big planes. Everybody, it goes crazy.
Yeah.
And that was kind of that year was like that. And from then on, it just kind of went and went and went. We went and beat Pittsburgh. And they were still Pittsburgh in 81. There was still Bradshaw and Swan and Stallworth and Lambert and all those guys. So that was pretty cool. And we lost the one game at home, which kind of stunk after that. But going into the playoffs, that was unfamiliar ground. We didn't know any better. I always referred to that team as kind of the happy dummies. We didn't know any better. We were having a good old time. And, we just wanted to know who was next. Just who do we get to play? Just once the schedule ran out, we got to the playoffs, just tell us who we got to play. We didn't really matter, didn't care.
100%. Yeah. And obviously, you went through the playoffs and, kind of an unexpected, obviously the NFC championship game, right? Which I got autographed by that guy, 87, right? I mean, the catch, talk to me about that. I mean, was that something you practiced? I mean, because we've heard it all the time, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah. It's every Cowboy fan I've ever had mentioned that play says Joe was throwing it away. Those of us that played in the offseason basketball on the basketball teams realized that both those guys were really good athletes and especially DC. DC could jump.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, and I always have, and I always will. Joe was just putting that where only DC could get it, because Everson Walls, who people forget, he led the NFL in interceptions that year. He was an All-Pro as a rookie, and had a fabulous career. Just never got off the ground, and for some reason, DC was able to get up there unmolested and catch that thing. It wasn't over at that point because there was some time left, and the whole Cowboys start driving, and Eric Wright just gets his finger on the back of Drew Pearson's jersey, and nowadays it'd be a penalty because
Right.
you'd say you can't pull a guy down like that. But yeah, he saved the touchdown and covered it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that was just so, it was such a statement win, right? Because for the 5 years that you were there prior to that, to the 81 season, the playoff run, it was just kind of, the Niners were just thought of as just like the team that stunk, right? And ultimately, finally getting over the proverbial hump of the 5 Super Bowl
Yeah.
Tom Landry Dallas Cowboys, right? It's pretty remarkable,
Well,
right?
well, plus it was also all week before we played the Cowboys, all you heard of was how the Niners always lost the Cowboys.
Right.
Didn't matter if it was in the 50s, didn't matter if it was the 60s, didn't matter. And the Niners had some great teams in the late 60s and early 70s with Dick Nolan and John Brody and Gene Washington, and go down the list. They had some Hall of Fame guys, but they couldn't beat the Cowboys. Cowboys came back in playoff games. So that's all you heard about. And we got so sick of hearing about that. It's like, none of those guys are playing. I don't know why you keep bringing that up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fact. They had lost to them. They hardly had any kind of winning tradition.
100%, yeah. And so now, obviously, heading into Super Bowl 16, right? You mentioned kind of the defense, and the game is obviously remembered, for a clutch defensive play in the second half. But I watched your interview. You said, obviously on the bus, Bill Walsh was telling you, was playing "This Is It," and he said, "This is the song. This is it, right? Remember the song." And so that way, that was the anthem heading into the locker room. And so, kind of when you got there, kind of what was the feeling like, right? It was snowing, the cars, everyone's getting there early, but actually no one was getting there early, right? And so, what was it like?
No, we got there early.
Yeah.
The offensive line, Ray Wershing, Joe, I think there were about 12 of us that didn't listen to what he said, because they were told by Secret Service and by the government that the vice president was coming to the game. It was H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
And he was coming to the game. So the place was going to get shut down. The traffic's going to be terrible. The snow was going crazy. There was ice. There was everything else. And we kind of sat there and went, yeah, sure. And we left the hotel like 5 hours early and went to the stadium anyway. And we were sitting there waiting for them. They kept getting phone calls in the equipment room that, they're still on the bus. The bus is stuck in traffic. And we were joking about it. We're trying to figure out what position Ray Wershing was going to play. We knew he could kick, but we're trying to figure out, maybe we had to put him somewhere where we could use him if he was going to be the only guy that could, the odd guy out. Yeah. But yeah, it was, it helped break some tension about the game, but it was just Super Bowls are strange to start with. And they used to be really strange, only from the standpoint of, there were less, painted faces, and NFL properties wasn't so omnipresent. So not everybody owned a jersey, not everybody owned a hat, not everybody, had team paraphernalia.
Yeah.
You go out early and there's people in, women are in dresses, dudes have sport coats on, and you're looking around this crowd going, what is this? And plus, you go out, the game started, let's say at 6:00 in Detroit, or 6:30 in Detroit. You go out on the field at 4:30, place was about 3/4 to half full already early, because everybody had listened and they said, if you don't get there early, you probably won't get in.
Yeah.
And I know my wife and the team bus, the family bus, got there just in time to hear Diana Ross sing the national anthem. as they were going to their seats.
Wow.
So they just in the nick of time, they made it.
It's awesome. Yeah. So talk about the game, right? Because the first half it was dominance, but the second half it got tight. Obviously, Dan Bunce, that's what the game is pretty much remembered for that play, right? At the goal line stand. But kind of to talk to me about the game, because obviously I heard you say like, the first half, you thought you were gonna crush them, and the second half, they come back, right? So kind of what was it like, going from first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had both practiced at the Dome. That was the only place to practice back then.
Yeah.
Not like the Lions had some big, beautiful indoor facility that didn't exist. They practiced at the Dome too. So one team had to go early, one team had to go late. So we went early, and that was the first time we really used crowd noise very much. So Bill Walsh had music playing in practice to get used to and simulate the fact that there'd be crowds and just there'd be distractions.
Right.
And I remember, and we're on the field, so they're running a defensive drill. The offensive guys we're in the background playing air guitars and listening to all these different musics, and you got little groups dancing in the background. You look over your shoulder, and Cincinnati's standing in the tunnel waiting to get on the field because they want to practice. And their head coach was Forrest Gregg, who was a very serious dude.
Yeah.
And they're all buckled up and ready to go, and they're in full pads. And we're laughing and joking and having a good time. And for us, to see them and know it, that was part of how the game went, because we were so loose early. We played really well, and then they started coming back, and then our defense played really well when they needed to, and our offense was good enough, led by an amazing catch and throw by Joe to Mike Wilson, to get a big, real clutch first down there in the fourth quarter, which set up Ray Worthington's last field goal, which gave us a little comfort zone.
It was great. It was just phenomenal, right? So now, obviously, you won the franchise, their first trophy, right? San Francisco is now the city of champions, right? So kind of talk to me about the mood, because I watched the Peacock documentary, kind of Joe, the Cool Under Pressure. And you mentioned kind of yeah, like you guys were rock stars, right? And everywhere you go, everyone was like and you saw like women come up to DC and like kissing him. And he told me that on the 30th anniversary, like 10 years ago. So kind of the catch, right? And so kind of what was it like for San Francisco, obviously after that first win?
Well, they were pretty excited.
Yeah,
they were pretty. To put it mildly, I mean, no team had actually won anything.
Right.
At that point, the Warriors hadn't, the Giants hadn't, the Raiders across the bay had won in 77 and in 80, but I think were they in LA by the time?
They were in LA, yeah, for the 81.
Yeah. By 80. Yeah. So we were the show, and you really was driven home by that parade. Because we met at the facility, or we met at the airport, and they drove us up to San Francisco in buses, and we parked, down on the Embarcadero, and they put us on those, simulated cable cars, and you started driving around. And when you first started driving on the streets, you're looking around, going, "Oh, this is going to be just stupid. Why are we on these silly cable cars? How big could this parade be?"
Right.
And then we kind of took a left, and suddenly you were looking down, I think it was Market, and you couldn't see road. You couldn't figure out where they were going to drive it, because there were so many people. There was about enough room to put these things through. I mean, there were literally a million or so people were in that little concentrated area. That was incredible. That was the biggest rush, going through that. And it was fun. It was really fun to see how happy that made the fans. And you were especially happy, those of us that have been around through some bad stuff, you were really happy for the group called the 49er Faithful, because it's been a cliche for a long time,
right?
But when you're on it, if it's 1978 and you're in week 16 and you're playing a team that's much better than you, and it's like freaking 48 degrees and raining and cloudy and crappy and cold. And there's about 27,000 to 30,000 people in the stands. Those ticket holders, those were the real 49er faithful, because those are the ones that were there week in, week out. Didn't matter who you beat, didn't matter who you were, they were going to see their Niners. And obviously that boat got a lot bigger starting in 81.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help but, think about those guys when we started to get successful, because they're the ones that that term, the 49er faithful, they always came to my mind when I heard that.
100%. No, the 49er faithful, the best fans in the NFL, right? I mean, there's no doubt
Right?
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they are extremely loyal.
Yes.
And they're loyal and obsessed to the nth degree, especially of late.
Yeah. Oh man, 100%. All right. And so obviously, great, obviously atmosphere, right? San Francisco's, buzzing. Then 82, 83, you fell short, but you personally, individually had some success, being a Pro Bowl selection, being named to your first All Pro team. So kind of talk to me about that, having that individual success, but balancing that out with kind of the pitfalls of not delivering in the postseason.
Yeah, it never really was much of a priority, for a lot of reasons. I was realistic. We weren't very popular. So we weren't going to win much of the popularity contests, which are Pro Bowls voting. And even the All Pro stuff, if you looked at the teams, it was basically all NFC East and AFC East. And, we were out on the left coast. We were in the witness protection program. The only reason they had to acknowledge us is we were winning championships. We should have been in the Super Bowl after the 83 season. The 82 season was an abomination, led by the strike.
Yeah.
And we handled winning so poorly. We're lucky any of us survived it. But yeah, we lose to Washington in the championship game, which really sucked. And for whatever reason, you can blame it on bad calls or whatnot. We didn't make enough of the plays. So, we lost that, but that was a real impetus into how good that team was in 84. And that was the best team I ever played on, without even close. And the number one reason that was the best team I played on was the defense.
Yeah.
No one really recognized how good our defense was, which was fine with us. It must have driven them nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the individual awards and that kind of stuff, that was really I'm not going to lie to you, the free trips to Hawaii back then were fun.
Right.
They were a highlight.
Yeah.
But, you didn't live for that. We lived for winning. Bill instilled in this organization, kind of like it all came from Eddie and Eddie's dad, Edward DeBartolo, sort of the quality they expected. They paid the best. You were going to be paid the best, and you were going to live the best. You're going to get top-notch everything. But in return, they expected to win. And if you didn't win, you knew there were ramifications. So it was really simple. We weren't real smart, but we knew how that thing worked. And yeah, that was how that whole thing went. And none of it in there was it anywhere, was it about being that was stuff in your contract. You'd have clauses that say, well, if you were all NFC or you were all pro, or if you were Pro Bowl, you got X, Y, Z. I mean, that's all that stuff was good for.
100%. And now you segued perfectly into the next time. Obviously the best team you ever played on, the number 4 best team ranked by NFL.com, the 84 San Francisco 49ers team. Now, talk to me about that season, right? They're, I think, outside the 85 Bears, the only team to go 15-1 and win the Super Bowl. So, kind of heading into that season, you mentioned the championship game lost to Washington, which you should have won. How much did that motivate the team, right, heading into that offseason?
Yeah, we were the first team to win 18 games.
Right.
Miami had won 17 at 17-0, but then we were the first team to win 18, and Chicago did it the next year.
Right.
But that was, and we had the one lapse, just like Chicago had their Miami.
Yeah.
We had ours. but at times it was almost not fair because that team was that good.
Yeah.
I mean, the running game, we had Roger Craig and Wendell Tyler. The passing game was unbelievable. It's hard to believe, but we went from that year to the next year we added Jerry.
Yeah.
But yeah, the '84 team, and that's what made that Super Bowl at Stanford. That was just used to piss me off, and even this last Super Bowl, to listen to all the BS. Oh, it's the first Super Bowl game played in a home city, and I went, my butt.
Yeah.
Stanford, the university, was like 2.5, 3 miles from our facility in Redwood City.
Yeah.
That's about as close. That was closer than Candlestick. So that was
Right.
more of a home game. But that's just me. I'm like that. But yeah, that having that, I would really not suggest that. I'm sure the Rams would tell you the same thing now from their experience, and Tampa from their experience, because having a home Super Bowl is not fun. You have more friends and neighbors and relatives and everything else than you can shake a stick at, and you can't get them all tickets. There's not a chance in the world
Right.
you can do that, and it can be a distraction. In fact, Bill put us in the hotel on Friday. Usually you're in the hotel for the night before, and nobody really complained. It was like, yeah, sure, okay, we'll go in the hotel early. We'll get away from all the friends and family and everything else starting to congregate.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, you don't really think about it from the player perspective, but I totally agree. I think it's a lot more, it's a lot more tedious, to see, try to get everything organized, and obviously for the fans, because the fans are so close, everyone's gonna try to get a ticket, so it's gonna be,
Yeah.
trying to get the
Well, plus
stadium.
it's distracting.
Right.
It's there's not a single thing you can do in your normal, whatever normal day you have,
Yeah.
that isn't intruded upon by what you're doing, the game you're going to play. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And kudos to both the last two teams that had that chance and won. But it's not easy. It can be very, very, very challenging, and I would deeply not suggest it.
100%. So yeah, let's talk about the Super Bowl, right? The game itself, right? Obviously, Reagan did the president of the United States does the coin toss. Hugh McElhenney, Mr. President, please flip. And you just heard how much of almost a home field advantage it was, right? Because as when he flipped it tails, right, the whole crowd went nuts. I mean, talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah.
It was very cool. And Stanford, great stadium, the old Stanford, not the new Stanford. The new nah.
Yeah.
The old Stanford was kind of like the Coliseum. I mean, it was gigantic, but it was all wooden bench seating. And it seated like 87,000 and 90,000, something like that. So it was a hell of a crowd, and it was mainly Niner fans. But I almost felt sorry for Miami, only from the standpoint, and I've got some guys now that have gotten to be real friends over these years, that they didn't really know how bad they were going to get their asses kicked. It was going to be a complete surprise,
right?
Because their defense was the killer bees, Baumhauer and Betters, and go down the bees. And it was Dan Marino, and all we read about the whole 2 weeks was Dan Marino and the Miami offense, and how they'd thrown for more touchdowns and passed for more yards and everything else. And I remember sitting there in some of the press conference getting asked all these questions, and it's going, we are going to play on offense. So you might want to at least check out some of the stuff we do. Well, yeah, but I had a comment that NFL Films captured behind the bench at the end of that game, that all these people came to see an offense and the wrong one showed up. And the wrong one in this case was us, because we passed for over 300 yards. We ran for over 200 yards. We just kicked the shit out of the Dolphins. Now the score was reasonably close, but Roger Craig, I think that was the game that most of America, NFL football fan America, watched him in that game and their ears perked up and they kind of went, wow, this guy's pretty good. and he just, and that's back when he was a fullback.
Right.
People forget that. He was a fullback then before Bill made him a halfback.
100%. No, and obviously the 18 points, it was a record score, a point scored by Roger Craig was most by a player in that game. Joe Montana, 331 yards, also a Super Bowl record. I mean, so many records are set offensively, right?
Yeah. And for Joe held this record for about 30 years, most yards rushing in a game by a quarterback.
Yeah.
That's because people always forgot that Joe could run. Joe was a really good athlete, and he gouged him for yards in that game.
He just gouged them up and down. What did you think the pre? I mean, they talk about on Joe's documentary. Did you think that the hype around Dan and the Miami Dolphins offense bothered Joe? Because he has never said that's bothered him to this day publicly. I mean, do you think it bothered him a little bit?
I wouldn't speak for him.
Yeah.
So if he says it didn't, I bothered the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Bothered the hell out of a lot of us.
Yeah.
You know, Joe has always been a supremely confident individual. So he never had any real doubts as to what he could and could not do. So yeah, I could see him not being too pulsed. You know, those of us that lived in a bit less of a shiny light didn't really understand or appreciate the lack. You know, whether it was, and the funny thing was, it had nothing to do, you know, from my perspective, them talking about Marino and their offense wasn't so much a slight of Joe as it was kind of an insult to Ronnie Lott and Carlton Williamson and Jack Reynolds and Fred Dean and Gary Johnson. And, you know, there was a list, Manu Tuiasosopo, go down that list of the guys that were on that defense. And that defense, Keena Turner, I mean, there were some great players on that defense. And those were the ones, you know, people in retrospect went, boy, Joe must have been insulted. Joe wasn't the one they should be worried about. The one they should have been worried about were the guys that played defense, because Ronnie and them took a lot of that personal, and it was fun to watch. It was fun to be on the sideline and watch them hitting them. And, you know, no one had the big thing back then was Dan Marino gets the ball out of his hand so fast, you can't sack him.
Right.
Yeah. Well, but they were getting back there as fast as he could drop. Because they were that good. Yeah.
My gosh, yeah, no, they would fly around, you know, get to the ball, you know, and you're right. I mean, no one really thinks about the defense, and obviously with the second championship and you know that team, I mean, it just it was further kind of solidified the case of the Niners being almost in the team of the '80s. But you know, I think it was just also a kind of a statement win to, you know, how good, you know, the Niners really were for anyone who didn't believe them. And I think, did you think that was kind of when the popularity started for the Niners around the '85 kind of you know, around that season?
Yeah, I think that's when, you know, that people kind of figured out that it might not be more than just a one-time deal.
Right.
That, you know, once that team was that good, and, you know, we were right there at the top of the NFC for the better part of hell from there, about the next 15 years. So, you know, winning Super Bowls through, you know, at least 10 or 12 of those years. So, no, it was something. It was really, really something to win it in '84 and then to come back and do it again in '88 in that game, because it was totally different kind of year. We weren't that good. And hell, we were 6-5 in the middle of the season, towards the middle of the season.
Yeah.
We could have easily, you know, been eliminated, but the team went on a run and we ended up, you know, beating Cincinnati again in the Super Bowl.
100%. So let's talk about the down years in between, though, right? Kind of the '85, '86, and '87 season before the '88, right, season. Kind of what was that? How was that like? You know, in that locker room, the tone, because obviously winning was the expectation, right? So
yeah, it was not very pleasant.
Yeah.
I mean, '87 was another one of those dreaded strikes. I would rather, you know, rub '82 and '87 completely out of my memory. I know the only people that choose to recognize those as normal years are Redskin fans because they won the Super Bowl both those years, but they can have those rings. No, the 85 and 86, I got hurt. I blew my knee out in week 15. Yeah, 15. 15 or 16, next to last game, down in New Orleans. So I didn't have to worry about being part of that wonderful playoff game against the Giants. But yeah, it was. There were a couple of years in there which were. 87 was one of the more disappointing years because they had the strike, and then we probably should have been a Super Bowl champion that year. We lose to the Vikings and just pure overconfidence.
Right.
You know, we thought we were too good and we weren't. So, you know, you lose that, and that comes back to repercussions. What we talked earlier about, you know, with Eddie and whatnot is they pay the best, they expect the best. And when they don't get the best, it's going to be somebody's ass.
Yeah.
And it was.
Yeah.
So, you know, then 88 was just a fairly magical the way it happened, the way it worked out. You know, it ended up being my last game for the Super Bowl that year. But I don't know. You couldn't write a script any better than that.
100%. You know, for me, what really stood out from that season was kind of, you know, Joe, like you mentioned, you know, that kind of the ultimate composure and confidence. You know, he wasn't one to really give speeches. You correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I took away from the Peacock documentary. Joe wasn't really the type of vocal kind of, he led by example, right? So when he gave the speech around the 6-5 mark, when he gave the speech in 1988 and his championship game against the Bears, right? You could just tell that there was just something special about this team, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we like I said, we went on that run, and then we didn't beat the Giants in the last game, but we didn't really have to, right? Because the Rams had lost earlier in the day. So we'd won the division, we'd gotten the bye. So it was like, oh, okay, sure. You know, and Giant fans to this day have a conspiracy theory that we lost to the Rams because we didn't want to face them in the playoffs. And I tell people all the time, you know, we lost to the Rams because we didn't have to. And we didn't have to beat them. And we really didn't care if we won or lost that game. We were in, we were going to get a bye. It was going to be nothing. That game would change nothing. So, you know, that was, you know, got in the playoffs, played that game against Minnesota. Roger had an amazing game in that game. Then we go back to Chicago in a frozen situation, literally frozen. One of the coldest games I ever came close to being, and it was crazy. And they were still really, really good.
Yeah.
Buddy Ryan had unveiled the Bear defense and all that. And, you know, they had all the Hall of Famers they've got. They were on defense back then. And, you know, Jerry Rice just ripped their hearts out with a long touchdown pass. And Joe decided to keep doing surgery.
Yeah. 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. And obviously the drive, you know, 93 yards in less than 2 minutes. You know, I mean, man, that must have been just one of the, that's one of the greatest drives in NFL history. Kind of, you know, I guess Joe's confidence was kind of, you know, obviously when he was hyperventilating, trying to get the timeout to Bill, but Bill waved him off both times. I mean, was there any concern? Did you see when Joe was trying to call a timeout, and was there any concern at all during that drive?
What, in Chicago?
No, in the Super Bowl.
Oh, in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
No, I never noticed. He was so cool. You couldn't tell if he was hyperventilating. You know, if he was hyperventilating, he hit it really, really, really well.
Yeah.
Really well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was something. I mean, I knew that was my last game. I had said at the press conference on Wednesday that I was retiring, and I was able to go out like that. And I was happy. I was happy as hell right up until probably the divisional playoff the year after that, when I was on the field for the NFL Today, and I looked at this team and went, God dang, they're going to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was my next question, because obviously, you know, you had a great career, right? You know, you went out on top, right? You're Super Bowl 23, your last game, which is also Bill Walsh's last game, you know. And so obviously, you know, they get the new head coach, you know, Seifert steps in, you know, being the assistant, you know, defensive coordinator, or being defensive coordinator for 10
Right.
years and stepping in. So kind of what was it like for you transition to broadcasting, kind of seeing that 1989 team, just kind of run the table again?
Oh yeah, no, it was good. I mean, if I was on that team, I'm not sure if I'd say that was the best team I'd ever played on. That was as right there with the '84 team.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a dominant football team.
Right.
When you look at all the bodies they had, it was crazy. It really, really was. I ended up doing that game for CBS Radio because
Right.
Hank Stram had laryngitis.
Yeah.
So it even made it worse for me because I'm like, oh no, good, thank you so much. Can't wait to do the game and watch even closer how I messed up and missed another ring. But no, I was very much at peace with what I did, and I knew how special the opportunity to do what I did was. So why grip about it? That's like we said earlier. That's that worrying about stuff that's out of your control.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. No, but I mean, it was
Yeah.
a great. Okay, so go. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, that's from. I sorry to be abrupt here, but I kind of got to get going. I've got
Oh, no worries.
an
Yeah.
interview I've got to be at to do some coaches.
No problem. Yeah. No, it was great having you on, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, no, if you want to pick it up somewhere, just let me know. I'd be more than happy to do it.
Oh, I definitely will. Everyone, Randy Cross, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.